great figures from the world of comics choose their 5 favorite comics or graphic novels to take with them to a desert island, as well as a bag of crisps and a biscuit. Now, once in a while, a figure comes along who makes such an impression in their chosen field that their impact is felt for years afterwards. Dr. Johnson did it with dictionaries. The Beatles did it with music. And in comics, the writer whose touch has turned everything to gold over the last 20 years is with us today. Marvel let him loose on the Avengers, and he promptly used them to basically invent the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They handed him Wolverine, he turned it into Old Man Logan. He reinvigorated the superhero comic and film genre with Kick-Ass. He outbonded James Bond with Kingsman, and his pioneering publication business is now reinvigorating Netflix. He is, of course, the magnificent Mark Millar. Hello, Mark.
Hello there, that's a great intro. I want that every time I come on stage somewhere, that's great.
I say that for everyone, exact same words. Especially the bit about, after Dr. Johnson wrote his dictionary, no more dictionaries were published for 100 years.
Seriously?
Yeah.
How did people look up swear words without that?
Well, they just kept looking up his dictionary.
And then Google comes along and wipes them out. It's tragic. Like, I remember a dictionary was a classic Christmas gift, wasn't it? And now kids will be like, what's this? This has only got some words in it. I want all words.
Yeah, same like in the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
Ooh, what's that?
A set of encyclopedias used to be a sign you were intelligent. Now it just means you have no Wi-Fi.
Absolutely, yes. But with that introduction that I gave you in mind, does it take balls to reinvent characters that have been around for longer than you've been alive?
Probably. I think it takes heart more than balls. I think like love is the big thing. Like if you're really, really into it, by osmosis, the reader will hopefully be into it too. I think that's the trick. You're really assembling words in a certain order on the page and hoping people like them, don't you? And it's like a combination. If you put the words in the wrong order, it's either really interesting or really not interesting, depending on what you do with those words. So there's a certain risk every time you write a story. It might be good or it might be bad, and it's pretty subjective. So I think all writers are pretty ballsy in that sense. And the trick, I think, is just to do something you like. Right.
So in other words, it's a bit like you've been sort of released into the sort of playpen, if you like.
Yeah.
You're allowed to play with the toys.
Well, somebody once described it when I was working at Marvel and DC. They would say driving the family car. So if you get Superman or something, that's you driving the family car, or Spider-Man. So there's a certain amount of trust. You have to kind of show them that you're reasonably responsible for a little while before you get to that point, and then you give them the keys. But the trick is actually to kind of do something quite interesting, to start doing some donuts and some skids and things once you've got the family car, or else it's kind of dull for the readers, isn't it?
Some writers, you get the feeling as a reader that one thing they don't have any problem with is coming up with stories. Is it difficult for you to come up with stories, or is that like the easy part for you?
It's easy to come up with bad ones. Like, I've got friends who've worked on books for 3 or 4 years, and I've been like, what's your new storyline about? And they were like, I don't know, it's just this guy's doing something, And I was like, to me, that's not enough. It has to be about something. Like, when I'm writing something, I like to be able to say, well, Kick-Ass is what it would be like if a guy like me tried to be a superhero without superpowers, just putting on a costume. Kingsman as a kid from a council estate, getting a chance to be James Bond. So I think I'd like to be able to kind of nail down in one line what a story's about, so that I know what it's about, and then that's going to intrigue a reader. Like, all my favourite things are something that's a pretty clear idea.
Well, with that in mind, and before we just make this nothing but a long chat, what's your first choice comic to take to a desert island?
Well, I'm starting to forget, because it changes all the time. Like every day it's like your favourite movies, isn't it? Like, no matter where, whatever day of the week it is, it'll be 10 different movies that you would pick. And it's the same with comics as well.
Well, if you want to change it from the list you sent me in an email yesterday.
I'm trying to remember now. Alan Moore and Frank Miller tend to be the kind of my main guys. I mean, I grew up with those guys. They were the guys that defined comic books for me in a lot of ways. So I think with that in mind, I'd say maybe my first one, possibly Swamp Thing issue 26, written by Alan Moore, drawn by Steve Bissett. And I love that book. It was my first ever Alan Moore comic. I'd never read one until that point. And what makes it especially interesting to me is Alan Moore bought it for me. And I didn't know who he was at the time, but I was at a comic book convention and I was chatting to Alan Moore. I knew he worked at Marvel UK, as he did at the time. And I was about 13, I think. And I'd spent my money. I came in with about £2.50. and that bought me about 5 comics. And comics, I think, were about 45p at the time or something. And I remember just seeing Alan Moore. He's quite a recognisable guy. You know, he's over 6 feet with a huge beard and long hair. And I asked him if he worked at Marvel UK, and he was so generous with his time. It was probably about a month before he became Alan Moore, you know, in the sense he would get mobbed everywhere he went. And he stood with me for like nearly an hour. And it was towards the end of a day on a Sunday at a weekend comic book convention in Glasgow. And I remember saying to him, like, you know, I've never read any of your stuff or anything. You know, I'm going to start though. I love the sound of everything you've been telling me about. He said, "Oh, you should try Swamp Thing." And I was like, I literally just have my train fare home. I had about 60 pence for my train home. And he said to me, "I'll buy it for you." And I remember he leaned over and went to a dealer, and 45p, he bought me Swamp Thing 26, which I still have upstairs.
That's an amazing story. And so that's really why you've chosen number 26, not because the story in it is particularly special, but this was your Alan Moore entry issue.
Well, it's a bit like your first Bond, isn't it? It's your first Alan Moore story. That it might not be the first Bond, but if you see Spy Who Loved Me, that becomes your favourite Bond. Goldfinger's maybe a better movie, you know, but Spy Who Loved Me is special because you were 7 when you saw that one. So in the same way, my first Alan Moore comic, I'd never read anything like that. I'd been reading Superboy and Justice League and stuff that was pretty kid-friendly. And then suddenly I see this thing that's pretty creepy and quite adult, and I was like, I need more of this, you know? And I remember borrowing money off somebody next day, and I went into Glasgow again next day and bought another couple of Alan Moore Swamp Things, you know, and over the next few weeks, I caught up on the ones that I'd missed. They started with issue 20, and I worked my way through those.
For those who don't know, I mean, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing that was the point where Alan Moore broke into the American comics market and basically went on to redefine comics from that point onwards.
Well, that's it. And to casual listeners, I mean, the significance of Alan Moore for people like me can't be understated, in the sense that comic books was always something that you didn't just have to live in America to work in, you kind of had to live around New York. So although I knew it's what I always wanted to do, living in just outside Glasgow in a small town called Coatbridge, unthinkable, the idea of working in New York. You know, the idea of working in Glasgow seemed glamorous, you know, never mind the idea of working in New York. So the idea that a guy from Northampton like Alan Moore got in just because the editors in New York saw how good the work he was doing in the UK was, that was fascinating. Suddenly the floodgates were open, and then there was a whole generation of writers come in behind him. Very quickly there was 3 or 4 other big writers come in, and then maybe 5 years after that another wave that I came in on in my early 20s.
So now you mentioned that you borrowed some pocket money from one of your brothers. You came from a very big family, didn't you? You're like the youngest of how many children?
6 of us. And it's funny, it's only now, you know, out in the real world that sounds like a lot. But when I was growing up, you know, the family next door had about 7 kids. There was a family of 10 just further along the road and everything, you know. So it just seemed normal in a Catholic working class area. You know, you just have as many kids as you like, you know.
Right. But it's interesting because you just said earlier when you were talking about you like comics to be about something.
Yeah.
You said it's like, I like to imagine what it would be like if I became a superhero. I think is what you said. And actually just thinking now about you as this sort of the youngest kid with all of these older siblings around. Actually, it kind of does make me think of, you know, Eggsy in Kingsman, you know, sort of this kid on a council estate, but who's got something special hiding inside him. And the same is true of Kick-Ass as well, isn't it?
Probably more Kick-Ass, actually. Kick-Ass is so autobiographical. Even like my mum died the same age as Kick-Ass's mum died. So, I mean, Kick-Ass hugely autobiographical, but I think there's always a little bit of you in everything, isn't there?
There's one line in the film, which I don't think it's in the comic, actually. But it's a line that I absolutely love.
With no power comes no responsibility. Except that wasn't true.
Please tell me that you wrote it.
That wasn't me. Yeah, that wasn't in the book. That would be Matthew and Jen. You know, so but it's a good line. It's a good
fantastic line, isn't it? I mean, it's truer than the original. You know.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, like it means everybody's accountable. You know, you've got to step up and live your own life. And I think all my books are about that. I mean, really everything I do is all about taking personal responsibility, I've realised, you know. But I do love that story. I love the idea of somebody who seems to have nothing ending up awesome. You know, like Luke Skywalker is that, Bruce Wayne is that, you know, like Bruce Wayne has his parents taken away from him as a kid. He ends up as Batman. You know, instead of getting into therapy, he just becomes Batman. And I like that. I like that self-improvement thing.
I guess that brings us to book number 2. What's that going to be?
I'd say I'm a huge Frank Miller fan, so I had to really think about it. My all-time favourite book of Frank Miller's is Dark Knight Returns, which is an amazing Batman book about Batman as an old man. And there's been a lot of books like this over the years, but Frank Miller was the first one to do it. The idea of what if superheroes existed in the real world and Batman aged 20 years after the Adam West TV show from the 1960s. And to me, that was revolutionary. I'd never seen anything like that in the 80s. I was still at school at the time when that came out, and it was so radical. But I almost can't choose it because I know it so well that I could literally just tell you word for word, page 1 to the final page. I love it so much, but I know it so well. The Desert Island, I'm thinking seriously about your Desert Island thing. So I think if I've only got 5 books in this Desert Island, I don't want something I know off the top of my head, you know. So I'm going to go for another Frank Miller that came out at the same time called Daredevil Born Again, which is the best Daredevil story ever. People might have seen Daredevil on Netflix, seen the Netflix show. A lot of it came from this book. Frank Miller's run on Daredevil inspired a lot of that TV show. And especially season 3 of the show came from Daredevil Born Again, which was just this dirty, realistic superhero thing. And you know, when you grew up reading Superman and Justice League and all these quite clean things, it's amazing to read something as naughty and violent and real as Daredevil Born Again. It was great. Realistic superheroes were very in vogue at that time.
Yes, and I think actually so one of the issues from the original arc, what's now known as Daredevil Born Again, I think it's been voted second greatest Marvel issue of all time in the official top 100.
Really? Was number 1 Spider-Man lifting the weight off himself? What was number 1?
It was number 8 actually.
Oh really? Yeah. What was 1?
But number 1 was Fantastic Four number 1.
Yeah, it's a good comic. You have to admit it's good.
The significance of it. Of course, this is not just Frank Miller. This is Frank Miller as writer with David Mazzucchelli as artist, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing because I'd watched this guy grow from about 2.5 years previous. He'd been drawing Daredevil for another writer who recently passed away, a brilliant guy called Denny O'Neil. And I remember thinking, this is as good as comics gets. You know, this is great. And I was really into it. And then Frank Miller came along a couple of years later and did Daredevil Born Again, around about 1986, 87. And I was like, wow, absolutely floored by it. And that really inspired me to be a writer too, because I was sending in submissions into DC really while I was reading this stuff. They got me so fired up that I couldn't contain myself. It wasn't enough to just read them. I had to write them as well. So I was putting together teenage plots and sending them into Marvel and DC. Probably from when I was about 13, I think. I think the first one I sent in was maybe a week or 2 after I met Alan Moore when I was 13.
We did one of these with sessions with Dave Gibbons, and he actually chose Batman Year One.
You're right. I know Dave loves that, yeah.
Yeah, which I suppose you could say is even closer in spirit to Daredevil Born Again, because it's exactly the same team.
Yes, and it's a masterpiece as well. I mean, it's like trying to, you know, choose between the Mona Lisa and Citizen Kane. You know, it's like it's 2 perfect things, isn't it? You know, like, so Miller was so on fire.
You don't want to get them mixed up, though.
What's that?
You don't want to get them mixed up, though.
Yeah, true. Daredevil, I think, like I say though, I think the reason I would take Daredevil to the island is I haven't read it as many times. I've maybe read it 5 times instead of 500 times, you know, so I think I'd get some good reading out of it in the islands.
What you're saying is effectively you're taking 6 books because The Dark Knight Returns is there complete in your head.
Yes, exactly. Oh, there's so many things like that for me though. I mean, I could almost sit and write and draw so many of these books because I read them so many times as a kid growing up.
Just looking again at the Daredevil story you've chosen, of course, the villain in it is Kingpin.
Yeah.
Unlike most villains, of course, the Kingpin, he doesn't have any superpowers, does he?
Yeah.
He's just a crime. He's basically the mafia. He's a crime.
He's just fat. Fat's his power.
Yeah. Fat and bald. Don't forget that. But I just wonder if that might be one of the aspects of it that appeals to you because of the gritty realness, the fact that it's not somebody with a superpower, but just somebody who just plays dirty.
It's certainly an inspiration. I mean, Kick-Ass, you can draw massive parallels with the Frank Miller run on Daredevil. So you're totally right. But at the same time, I really love Superman as well. You know, I love the big, outrageous stuff with guys pushing planets around and traveling through time and everything. And the reason I did Kick-Ass is, I think, probably because I'd been writing the Avengers as the Ultimates over at Marvel. I'd done X-Men, I'd been doing Spider-Man, Wolverine. And it was actually quite lovely to ground it a little bit and make it the real world after spending all that time in the Marvel Universe.
Was it that then that led you into creating your own publishing company?
Well, it was actually Stan Lee. Stan Lee, back in around about 2003, SFX magazine had won an award or something, and they said to me, "Look, you seem to be doing what Stan Lee did 30 years previous." Said, "Would you like to interview Stan as part of a series we're doing of people who are doing a job now, talking to somebody who did the job back in the day?" And that was fascinating to me. I thought, right, I'd met Stan briefly at a signing when I was about 18 or 19 and got to talk to him for 10 seconds. But this was like, Stan was going to be forced to speak to me for like 90 minutes or 2 hours or something. I was like, this is awesome, right? There's no way I'm not doing this. This is going to be brilliant. So that was what triggered Millar World, because what I did was, I think I'd been at Marvel about 2 years at that point, 2.5 years. And I had 4 books in the top 5 that month. I had like book 1, 2, 3, and 4 out of 5 in terms of sales. And I was quite proud of myself and everything, and Stan said to me, "Well, that's great, And he said, "But you'll never own these characters." He said, "This is like, I didn't go and write DC, the characters that have been around for 20 years. He said, I went off and created my own stuff with Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. He said, "I think you've got your own take." He said, "Why don't you go and do your own thing?" And remember, as well as being an amazing writer, Stan's a brilliant businessman and an amazing editor. And I think Stan Lee coming in was like the clouds opening up and God speaking and God saying, like, "You should go and try this." So I decided to do Millar World and create my own characters next day. I mean, I remember being on the train in Queen Street in Glasgow, and I bought a W.H. Smith's pad, and I remember very clearly jotting down some potential ideas, and Wanted was the very first one that I did. And really quickly, I mean, 2 months, I think, before the book came out, I had a movie deal in Hollywood, which was crazy, and I was like, this is nuts. And everything I was doing was suddenly getting picked up by Hollywood. Suddenly Angelina Jolie's appearing in the movie, and we were getting these deals immediately, and I was like, right, okay, I'm going to get out of Marvel and just go and create my own thing now, So that was all the inspiration I needed, just it seemed viable suddenly.
So did you get back to Stan afterwards and say, "Hey, thanks for the tip"?
I actually had a lovely long-distance correspondence with Stan, like I invited him to every premiere, and I always sent him a thank you. Every time there was a film coming out, I'd always send him a little thank you and say, this literally would not be happening if we hadn't done that phone call, And it really was great. I remember I was so nervous before I phoned Stan, and I'm not somebody who gets nervous. Like, I'm never bothered about these things. But I remember phoning Stan was like phoning Batman. It was just, or Galactus.
You're genuine heroes.
Yeah, and he almost doesn't seem like a real person, because Stan is somebody who you saw drawn as a caricature on the bullpen bulletin pages. If you think about it, you didn't see him in real life. He didn't come to the kind of shows I went to in Glasgow or anything. So Stan seemed a very larger-than-life figure, even when I was working in the industry. And I remember hesitating for a bit. I did the same thing with Mark Hamill. I had to call Mark Hamill about appearing in Kingsman, and I did the same thing. I hesitated for about 30 seconds before I typed in his number, but he's Stan Lee, of course you do.
In some ways, you could say that Stan Lee, as well as creating a whole load of heroes, he kind of created something more important than that, which is he actually created a whole world of writers and artists.
The thing I always do remember is, like, Stan, the 10 seconds that I spoke to him when I was like 18, 19 was really courteous and really, really nice. And now every single time I sign something, if I'm doing a book signing somewhere or just a random signing, I always say thanks, because they're right.
Absolutely.
People always remember it too, as I do, 35 years later.
Wonderful. Third choice.
Yeah. Cary Bates' Superman. Cary Bates' Superman comic is so great. Like, he is the guy who wrote Superman from before I was born until I left school almost, So, like, he wrote Superman for a huge amount of time. I struggle to do an 8-issue run on something. I think, right, I've got to try and make this good for 8 issues. To do literally hundreds of issues or something, how do you come up with 2 Superman stories a month for 20 years? And usually they were self-contained, so there was no fat. It wasn't like a 6-part story the way you can now and just spread your idea out over 6 months. Like, 2 Superman comics a month, and he did it. And over the years, I've got rid of quite a few of my comics just as I've moved house and things, or lost some and everything. But the ones that I've never, ever touched, there's still a perfect run of, is my Cary Bates Superman comics, because I love them so much.
So is this because it's just you're in awe of the achievement of writing that much material, with a reliable level of quality over such a long time? Or is it because there's something in the stories themselves that just kind of really inspires you?
There's something in the stories, and I'd have to stop and really think about it to even pick some out, because I mean, this is what's great for the desert islands. There's 20 years worth of stuff here, right? I could build a boat with this stuff,
Yeah, but
and
look what you did, because Mark, you've taken one issue of Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
You're saying, I'm going to take an entire run of about 200 Superman comics.
But they were all so inventive. They were actually just so inventive, and every one was unlike the previous one, which I loved. You had stuff that was like fairy tales, you had stuff that was like hard sci-fi and everything. And it's always been my favorite character. I'd always wanted to write it. So getting to actually finally do it was so exciting that I actually dedicated the book to him. I dedicated the book to Cary Bates. And he's a writer that isn't really remembered now. That I'm sure almost nobody listening to this will know Cary Bates' stuff, although he was very prolific. He's a great mystery. It's a bit like Steve Ditko is one of comics' great mysteries. Only 3 photographs exist of Steve Ditko. And Cary Bates is like that. I can only think of 2 photographs of Cary Bates that exist. And yet, for me, so massively inspirational. What
you're talking about here, this really comes from before the sort of the 80s comics revolution that we were talking about before it all became down and dirty. This really goes back to the clean Superman, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Pre Batman Dark Knight version.
Yes.
So is there something, do you think there's something about the almost sort of innocence of Superman's comics of that era that speaks to you in some way?
Yeah, I mean, we, as writers, I think we draw upon our childhoods for this type of writing in particular. Everything is possible when you're a child, and I think that works very well for DC. And when I do that kind of stuff, I draw upon my affection for that kind of material. So I think Superman in particular for me works really well in that period. And it hasn't so much worked since, because I think it does what the character set out to do originally, which is to be children's entertainment and to be something that's quite uplifting. And I think one of the things that Superman has struggled with since is that it almost exists out of time now. Like Superman is very much, I think, I hate to say this, but I think maybe as a 20th century character in a lot of ways. Well, he's all about America being outward looking and wanting people to come in. The Statue of Liberty, welcome to the harbour. It's like, the idea of welcoming immigrants is the basis of Superman when you think about it, isn't it? So it's no coincidence it was written by 2 Jewish kids just before World War II, who happened to be living in the States. And seeing atrocities going on elsewhere, So I think that Superman he's a refugee. He's somebody who's come for a better life in America, and that is the 20th century. And when you see photographs of Christopher Reeve standing with the Twin Towers behind him and everything on a bright summer's day, it just feels like another world almost. And I think Superman really belongs in that world.
I suppose it's arguable that the idea of saying, hey, do you know what, we're going to do a new, darker, more gritty version, has become in itself a little bit tired as a central concept. I suppose it actually might be more original with Superman to say, you know what, we're going to do an undark, ungritty version. That would be interesting to see as a sort of, with a sensibility which doesn't ignore the darkness that is, enveloped the world of superheroes, but kind of moves one step on beyond it. That would be
exactly. I think you're totally right. And I think Kingsman, we tried to do that with Kingsman. We tried to make Kingsman really fun. James Bond had quite a few movies where it was pretty dark, and you came out of it. You didn't come out of those films wanting to be James Bond. You came out a bit fed up. He's standing crying in the shower or whatever he was doing in these films. And you wanted to see jokes and gadgets and all that kind of stuff. And I think Superman's the same for me, or Flash Gordon and all these feel-good movies of that era, which is, again, my childhood, everything I've ever worked on, I can sort of draw a straight line back to something I loved when I was a kid. That's the inspiration that it comes from.
Just while we're talking about Kingsman, by the way, why did you choose to have, I mean, I'm hoping everybody's read the book, but basically the book starts with Mark Hamill being kidnapped and then killed, in fact, very, very quickly. And in the film, the actor Mark Hamill plays a completely different character at the start, who is also kidnapped. But why did you have him doing that and not being Mark Hamill as in the book?
Well, it's interesting, actually. There's a great story behind this. There's 2 quick, really good stories. One is that I had a plot line in the book, which was celebrities were getting kidnapped all around the world and you didn't know why, because the big bad guy is about to destroy 90% of the planet and he wants to make sure that his favourite singers and his favourite movie makers and his favourite actors and everything are all okay. So he puts them inside Mount Everest, so he keeps them in there. And Mark Hamill, literally Mark Hamill, the actor, is being kidnapped at the beginning to make sure he's okay. And I had to actually call Mark Hamill up about this when I was doing it in the book. And I'd meant to do it for weeks. I just wrote Mark Hamill as a sort of placeholder thing and thought, okay, I'll get Mark's permission. I know somebody who knows him. I'll get his phone number and I'll call him up. And then it actually got drawn and I was like, God, I've really got to call Mark Hamill and get his permission. So then I called him the night before it went to press because I leave everything to the last minute. I called up and I said, listen, Mark, you don't know me, but I'm a friend of one of our friends and is it okay if I kill you in this comic book that I'm doing? And he must have thought, this guy's an idiot, But he was so gracious. He was really nice. And he was like, of course. And as it turns out, I knew he's a huge comic book fan. So he loved the idea of being in a comic and everything was great. And I said, listen, we're talking about doing this as a movie at some point, a couple of years down the line. Obviously, if you're up for it, it'd be great for you to play yourself. So that's the sort of the origin of it all. But then when it actually came to the script, Matthew and Jane were writing the script and they said, there's something not working with this plot line of the celebrities being kidnapped. I was like, how do you mean? He says, well, I'm just thinking about it in practical terms. Because in the comic book, I had Ridley Scott being kidnapped. You saw Ridley Scott being kidnapped and things like this, And I got Ridley's permission to do this and everything, But and David Beckham's in it and everything. And he said, Colin Firth's in this movie and Samuel L. Jackson's in this movie. He says, so who's going to know the difference between the celebrity and a guy playing a character who is a celebrity? And it was a very good point. Matthew says, we're going to have to play down the celebrity thing. And I said, well, listen, I've already said to Mark Hamill about this, and I'm really into the idea of it. And Matthew's like, I'm the biggest Star Wars fan in the world, and I love Mark Hamill, so we'll do it. So a character that I had in the middle of the book, a character called James Arnold, we just merged the two and just had him playing Professor Arnold at the beginning of the thing as well, So that's the backstory.
Fantastic. And I hope you're very glad that I asked about that and not the obvious question that everybody always asks about the Kingsman movie.
What's that? What's the question?
The anal sex question. I mean, I know everybody talks about it the whole time.
Do you know, I'm rarely asked about it, to be honest, because it wasn't in the book. My hands are clean, so that's Matthew.
Unfortunate metaphor to use.
No, Matthew. It's funny. It wasn't in it originally, and the cut that we saw. I think it was like the fourth time we were down in the screening room. Matthew put this in. And he didn't tell us. He said, you have to watch this. And Jane and I both looked at each other at the end of it, and we were like, what? But I mean, I get his gag. His gag was, the re-entry joke at the end of, I think it was the end of Moonraker.
007. My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
And he thought, just going straight for it and going right. It was kind of, I get what he was going for, But Matthew loves to just poke the bear occasionally, and that's what I love about him, because he never plays it safe, and that's kind of great in its own way.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us on to your penultimate comic choice. What's it going to be?
Superman 400. And what I love about that book is the sheer scope and ambition of it. It's a book that starts in history. It starts in the distant past, and it goes to the end of time. And it's like 72 pages long or something, and it covers all time and space. And the guy who was editing the book had so many good contacts. He was a man called Julius Swartz, and he was Ray Bradbury's old editor back in the 1940s. He had the most amazing address book. And for this one book, it was a big anniversary issue of Superman. He basically called everyone. So you got Ray Bradbury. I mean, imagine a Superman comic where Ray Bradbury writes the introduction, and you've got guys like Frank Miller, who was the biggest guy there. He does the back cover and the story inside it. Jim Steranko, Bernie Wrights, and all these people had never drawn Superman before. People who were huge at Marvel, like John Byrne and everything. Howard Chaykin did the front cover. It was just insane. Will Eisner was inside it. Mobius, the greatest European artist of all time. So basically, it was a comic fan's dream. Everybody who was great was in there. I can't think of an equivalent in the industry since. And it's my ultimate favorite
single story, but drawn by loads of different people all the way through.
It was. I think it was about five or six short stories pulled together with a sort of narrative thread running through them, all written by the same guy. And what they did was they gave each the little short stories out to a current genius.
You're saying some of them had never even drawn Superman before?
Most of them hadn't. I mean, that was the novelty of it. Guys like Mobius, like I said.
Yeah.
and Jack Kirby and people like this who'd been very famous at Marvel coming in and doing a pin-up or something for this book.
Can you imagine if the original art of that book
I've tried to buy some of it, and the prices are insane. I mean, I think people knew it was special. The Mobius one is nuts. I mean, I saw that up for sale, and it's like the price of like 3 houses or something. You know, you could buy half of Scotland for the price of that Mobius book.
So actually, is it one thing that interests me, though? I haven't heard you talk about all these other people and how inspired you are by them. If there were to be one of your own works that I wanted you to take to the desert island, if that were the case, is there one that you think you might be able to take?
It's interesting. You know what's really weird, actually, is I never reread my own stuff, but recently I have, so I can answer this question because I've reevaluated everything over the last little while. And the stuff that you think is your best stuff, when you read it again 15 years later or whatever, you think, it's all right, it's okay. And then sometimes the ones you don't really think about surprise you by being good. And the reason I'm reading it is my middle daughter, who's 8, she's obsessed with my stuff just now, which is really lovely, you know. But it's kind of weird at the same time, because even stuff I don't really like, that I feel I could have done a better job, I'm having to read. And there's a slight punishment to reading it out loud when you think, that dialogue could be a little better. And it's quite tough, but I'm overwhelmed by the fact that she's enjoying it. So I'm reading it to her every night when I put my 2 youngest to bed. I sit in between their 2 beds and I read them these stories. But like, and all my kids are very creative, but she is particularly into comics. And so anyway, like I say, I've been reading all my own stuff. And the one that I was quite charmed by, and it might just be because she liked it so much, was a book nobody's read. It's a Marvel book called 1985. And I don't know, you've probably not seen it, but it was a kind of Goonies type adventure. And the idea was a bunch of kids in the real world on BMX bikes and everything. You know, so it's set in the year 1985. They find an old house with a basement with a weird message written in paint on a door. And when they open up the door, they walk into the Marvel Universe. And the reason they find this place is because the villains of the Marvel Universe have been coming through and stealing in this universe where there's no superheroes to stop them. So there's all this weird stuff going on with the Sandman and Electro, and all these people are robbing banks in this small American town, and then slipping back into the Marvel Universe through this door. And the story is about kids going into the Marvel Universe and the villains coming here. And it's got a great ending. I don't mind spoiling it because nobody will read this, you know, but the Marvel heroes come through the door and come through and save the kids in the real world. So it's a big Avengers assemble moment, you know, when they actually come through and save our reality from the bad guys who were going to stay here. And I read it and I was like, this is really good. It's a really good comic. And my kid loved it. So I think I'd take that one.
It sounds fantastic. And it doesn't surprise me, given what we've been talking about in this interview, that once again, you've got normal kids in the 1980s walking into the toy shop of the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
It's got that metaphorical, autobiographical aspect to it again, which clearly is so important to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your final choice going to be?
I'll have to go back to Alan Moore. I mean, there's so many people I love. I told you there's like Garth Ennis's Preacher, which is amazing.
Oh.
Warren Ellis's Authority and Planetary. I don't know if you've read them, but they're fantastic. Yes. Massively inspirational for me.
Take them all.
Alan Moore's Miracle Man or Marvel Man was so massive for me. Like when I met Alan Moore and got those Swamp Things, I then started to remember this is before the internet, so I had to ask people, what else has this guy done? And the guys in the comic stores were always very good at saying, okay, you should maybe think about buying this too, you know. So I went off and I bought Warrior, which had those books in it. So I think that was a real contender. V for Vendetta and Miracle Man were just...
Mark, I mean, listen, I know it's sacrilege to say it, but come on, let's be honest. Miracle Man pisses on Watchmen.
Do you know, I agree. I actually think in terms of being revolutionary, you'd never seen anything like it before. Like you say, we just come
revolutionary, tragic.
Yeah, childhood comics straight into adult comics immediately.
And the opening image, I bet you're not going to choose this now, but not the opening image, the image that comes at the end of the flashback sequence at the start of issue 1 of Miracle Man, where the action pauses and it zooms in on his eye.
Yeah.
The quote from
Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, yeah. That has to be one of the greatest moments in comics.
Oh, well, it was the first time. I don't think anything like that had ever been done before. It was certainly the first time I'd ever seen it. And like I say, I was at that age where I was just ready probably to close the book on comics and go and discover the real world. And I was like, no, this is just fine. I'm going to stay here. And I was hooked. You knew it was something special, didn't you? From that moment on. But weirdly, I'm not going to choose Miracle Man. It was the one I almost chose, but I think I'm going to go with From Hell, which is Alan Moore's and Eddie Campbell's massive Jack the Ripper story. I mean, I remember they started it around about 1988 and it finished in like 2003 or something. It ran for a long, long time. I mean, I went from being a teenager to being a dad over the course of this, which I know in Scotland can be 9 months, but But I mean, the reason I think I would take that is not only is it brilliant, and I've completely forgotten it because I've only read it once, it'd be really fresh. It's about 800 pages long or something. So I feel that could be the rest of my life on that desert island. So I think that's ideal.
Okay, well, yeah, you can definitely have it From Hell, and furthermore, if you're on the same island as Charlie Adlard, you can share it with him because he's also chosen From Hell.
Oh, really? We could get together and make some kind of dinghy with my volume and his volume. It'd probably take both our bodies.
Although the paper does tend to get soggy, but yeah,
that's true.
But at least you can discuss it. You can discuss it with each other. You've given me all your 5 choices now, and you've really put together a collection of your heroes, haven't you?
Yeah.
These are the people who have inspired you throughout your life and career, and it's their sort of print that is being left on you, and that's really why you're taking all of these books.
If you're on something as grim as a desert island and you've probably got malaria and all this kind of stuff, what better than something you really love there to keep going. So,
well, that brings us to the end of your 5 choices. Now, the really hard thing is you've got to choose one luxury item. What's it going to be?
I would choose Twitter because I didn't think I needed it, but I do. I gave it up for Lent last year, and it was the hardest 6 weeks of my life. Twitter is just so fun. And what I love about it is I'm a news junkie. Anybody who works in fiction loves fact. Most people chill out to fiction because they live in fact. We live in fiction. So we chill out to fact in the evening, and there's nothing more fun than having every newspaper and every TV channel and everything at your fingertips. Every stupid opinion, every clever opinion. It's all there. I love it. Twitter and a good Wi-Fi signal.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure we can arrange that. God knows how. Okay, so you've got Twitter. What's going to be your choice of crisps?
I have to say my 2 crisps of choice, like if it's a night out, my 2 crisps of choice would be like smoky bacon, but it has to be proper Golden Wonder, the good stuff. And also Monster Munch, but not pickled onion. Monster Munch, flaming hot, amazing. Flaming hot
Monster Munch, that is what you're taking, if only to get it away from everybody else. And the final thing we need from you is, if you've got one, a favourite biscuit.
Oh, Fruit Club. Jacob's Fruit Club, of course. The gentleman's choice.
The gentleman's Sorry, while we were growing up, it was Mint Club was the gentleman's choice.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, the Orange Mint Club, all these things I see as pretenders. And just the club biscuit is the weirdest thing. Like nobody buys that, But the Fruit Club, amazing, absolutely love it. And again, we've actually stopped buying them because I can't control myself with them. Like I wish I had what the middle classes have, which is delayed gratification. Like, I don't have delayed gratification. I wasn't raised to have it. So when my mum used to buy the pack of 6 Fruit Club biscuits, I'd have them all eaten them one day easily. I'd just go and eat one, half an hour later go back, have another one, and then I'd have nothing for the rest of the week. And I do the same as an adult, even as a man. If we've got them in the house, I've got them all eaten by the time dinner's ready. I've eaten 6 Fruit Clubs. So we try not to buy them because I'm so obsessed with them.
What we'll do is we'll allow you to take a vat of chocolate and an inexhaustible supply of fruit. Enjoy yourself.
Thanks very much. That sounds all right. Heart attack 6 months later.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our Desert Island Comics. So thank you very, very much, Mr. Mark Millar.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.